in case you hadn't heard by now, you do have a test coming up. It's either going to be this Thursday or Friday, depending on what class you're in. And so let's talk about what's going to be on that test. Basically, anything since we took the last test would be fair game. So here I have, in an organized manner, some of the basics that we've been talking about in this class. So these 6 different trig functions, the basic shape of each one, so in other words, how to graph it, how it's defined in terms of sine and cosine. That's how we found all these different graphs. What its period would be, where it's equal to 0, where it's undefined. So this little chart is going to help us answer some questions. Now, number 1 and number 2 should already be in your notes, or at least on a video on Google Classroom. And so if you don't have those notes or you need to watch that again, go check that out. For number 2, that should also be in your notes, and it was just on that graphic organizer. Number 3, let's try some of these problems. And so we're going to base these problems off of the patterns that we saw when we graphed all 6 trig functions. So first off, sine of 13 pi. So, based off of the pattern we saw when graphing sine is 0 at every whole number times pi. So sine of 13 times pi would qualify as a whole number times pi. So sine would be 0 there. B, cotangent of negative 27 pi over 2. So cotangent at every odd number times pi over 2 is 0. So that answers that question as well. Side note, why is cotangent 0 at odd numbers times pi over 2? Because cosine is 0 at odd numbers times pi over 2. And cosine is on the top of the cotangent fraction. So really it's just these 2 things that you'll want to remember. C, cosecant of 11 pi. So cosecant at a whole number times pi is undefined. Why? Because sine would equal 0 there. So 1 divided by 0 is undefined. D, secant of 1,000,001 pi over 2. Now, I added this over 2 in later, but secant at an odd pi divided by 2 is going to be undefined. Why? Because cosine would be undefined there. E, tangent of 27 pi over 2. So tangent is sine over cosine, and so cosine would be 0 at that point. That's an odd number times pi over 2. Cosine would be 0. So, therefore, tangent is undefined. Cosecant of 7 pi over 2. So cosecant is 1 over sine. And sine of pi over 2. Actually, that's not a good problem. Let's pretend that says cosecant of 7 pi. There we go. I changed my mind again. Okay, cosecant of 7 pi. So cosecant of any whole pi would be undefined. Why? Because sine of x is equal to 0 there, and 1 over 0 is undefined. Now, secant of some large odd number times pi over 2. So secant, again, is 1 over cosine. Cosine at that point would be 0. Therefore, secant will be undefined. And H, tangent of negative 5 pi. So tangent for any whole number would have sine on top be equal to 0, and then cosine on bottom is either going to be equal to 1 or negative 1. So 0 divided by 1 or 0 divided by negative 1 would be 0. So tangent's going to be 0 at any point like that. So there are our answers. They're all either 0 or undefined in this case. So that'll be one probably very small portion of the test. Let's look at number 4. So for number 4, we want to give the amplitude, period, frequency, phase shift, center line of these. So first off, the amplitude is always the absolute value of A. The period is always 2 pi divided by the absolute value of B. The frequency is just 1 divided by the period, the reciprocal of the period. The phase shift is negative C divided by B. And then the center line would be at y equals D. So this is for f of x equals a sine of bx minus c plus d. Actually, that's plus c. There we go. Or similarly, a times cosine of bx plus c plus d. So it could be a sine or cosine. Works either way. Okay. So for 4a, we want to give these values for this function. So first off, a would be 1/3. So the amplitude would equal the absolute value of 1/3. The period is 2 pi divided by 5. And that's as simple as it's going to get. And then the frequency is the reciprocal of the period, 5 over 2 pi. The phase shift is negative pi, so positive pi, divided by 5. And then the center, since there's no d, would be y equals 0. And now for problem B. Same thing, different question. So for B, we've got y equals cosine of 4x plus 14 minus 2. So the amplitude, because A is 1, will be 1. Then the period, 2 pi divided by B, so 2 pi divided by 4, which reduces to pi over 2. The frequency is 1 over the period, so 2 over pi. Just flip it over. The phase shift, negative c, c would be 14, so negative 14 divided by b, which is 4, which would reduce to negative 7 over 2, or negative 3.5. And then the center line would be at y equals negative 2. Now, number 5. So a related question, we want to give the equation of a sine function with this amplitude. So first off, we know that the function is going to be sine of something. There's an x in there somewhere. So the amplitude is this a value right here. So the amplitude is going to be 4, so we put a 4 there. The period is 4 pi. So remember, the period is 2 pi over b. So if we want to know what the value of b is, let's set that equal to 4 pi. So in other words, we'll solve for b, multiply both sides by b first. So 4 pi times b, multiply it up. And then to get b by itself, divide by 4 pi. And then reduce. So b equals 1/2. And now we need to find c. So the phase shift formula has a c in it. It's negative c divided by b. which we already know is 1/2. And we're given that the phase shift is negative pi. So now we just solve this equation for c. So to do that, we'll multiply by the 1/2 first. So negative c equals negative 1/2 times pi. Multiply the negative 1/2 up. And then divide by the negative, so it cancels out. C equals positive 1/2 pi. Or pi over 2 would be a better way to write it. And so that's going to be plus pi over 2. And then it's got a center at y equals 4, so the center line is the d, so that's plus 4. And there it is. Now, I'm going to make another video for number 6, so I'm going to stop this one right here. If you have any questions before class, make sure and ask them. We'll have about 30 minutes perhaps to review before the class period starts. So if you have questions, you can ask them then. Please ask specific questions, not like, hey, what's sine? Or something like that. But maybe like, how did you multiply by that 1/2 or something like that. Specific questions. I'll see you on Thursday/Friday.